everybody, I'm Richard. So I'm a creative front-end developer. I make a lot of like interactive charts and graphs and just fancy moving things and data visualizations and stuff in React and D3. And I work at QuantumBlack. We're an advanced analytics consultancy owned by McKinsey, and we're hiring like everybody else. Come work with us. It's a great place to work, yada, yada, yada. You all know the drill. But anyway, today I'm going to take you through the basics of working with D3 and React. So a common problem when you want to make a chart is choosing what to build it in. It's a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of different options. You've got loads of charting libraries like HiCharts and Chartist and Chart.js. And you've also got a bunch of charting libraries built on top of D3, like Plotly and Victory Charts, which is made by our friends at Formidable. That one's built in React, so that's a good option. But you also got C3, R2D3, RJD2, D20, C4, R2D2, and the NVA. So it's overwhelming. And these libraries typically provide a few basic chart types and abstract away most of the complexity. And whether this is a help or a hindrance really depends on your use case. Now, in general, and obviously it depends on the library, but the advantages of using a charting library is that you can get something built pretty quickly, you've got less upfront time investment, and it's usually a bit more readable, at least more readable than D3. Though, obviously, again, it depends on the library. But on the other hand, you've got some disadvantages too. Like, they're not always that performant. Like, sometimes because of excessive download size, and sometimes just in terms of animation performance. I found they can be a bit janky at times if you're doing something a bit more complex, but your mileage may vary. There's also less control. Like, abstractions may not fit your use case. Because they're usually fairly opinionated, they don't always do everything you want them to. Often I find that it's not until a chart is nearly done that I discover the limitations of a given library's API and realize that it's not able to implement certain quirks of the design they've been given to build. So then I have to start all over again in something else. So what I often do is I'll tend to prototype an MVP in a charting library and then build a more fleshed out version in D3 once I've got more time to invest. But some of you might be wondering what D3 is and why I didn't include it in the list before. After all, it's a data visualization library too. But unlike the others, it's a bit more low level, enough so to be a different sort of animal. It's a bit more like jQuery or underscore than a true charting library, in the sense that rather than giving you ready-built charts or chart components that you can configure, it gives you the tools to build your own custom charts from scratch, and along with a set of best practices. And in fact, the syntax looks pretty similar to jQuery too. So if you like method chaining, you'll love it. D3 is also designed to enforce separation of concerns between data and presentation, just like the web was traditionally supposed to with HTML and CSS. And I know that's maybe not quite a popular idea these days with CSS and JS and all, maybe not the right crowd for that idea, but I think it could still be a useful model at times, like, fight me. But there are several advantages to using D3 over other charting libraries. Like, D3 gives you full control over how things look and has so many different tools and algorithms that you can mix and match to create really cool effects. I've been working with D3 for about 4 years now, and I still regularly come across things where I'm like, whoa, D3 can do that? It's also very large, like lots of different APIs. It's got a pretty huge file size if you import the whole thing, as I did on the slide deck. But it's modular, as of version 4 at least, so you can just import the bits you want, which keeps it nice and small. It also works pretty seamlessly with existing web technologies. It plays with other tools. You can manipulate any part of the DOM, or use it with SVG, Canvas, the WebGL, whatever, even React. D3's animations are also usually pretty smooth, even with transitions involving hundreds of different objects. And finally, there's a large community, lots of examples, tutorials, Stack Overflow questions, and demos. It's been around since 2011, and so yeah, this is pretty good. On the other hand, there are some downsides. Like, it can take longer to get your head around it, especially the data binding, which I find can be a bit counterintuitive. Like, you have to select something that doesn't exist and then like add something onto it. Did my head in the first time. And the code can be a bit more complex to read, which means you need to put more thought into documenting it. If you want to do a standard chart type like a bar or line chart, D3 will definitely take you longer. I find that it's best to use in situations where you're given a specific design to use, specific design that you need to implement as closely as possible, and your designer is really watching you very closely to make sure it's pixel perfect. And finally, if you learn D3, then eventually your flatmate will ask you to speak about it at her meetup. So there's that too. Now, I mentioned that D3 plays well with other tools, and that includes React. But when using them together, you need to make a big decision about which to use for updating the DOM. D3 is still perfectly fine to use for layout calculations, even if you use React for all the DOM rendering. And in fact, out of D3's 30 modules, 22 of them don't have any API methods at all that come in direct contact with the DOM. So it's fine if you just want to use React, but they're both great for DOM rendering in their own separate ways, and each have their own advantages and disadvantages. For instance, D3 is great for animation and has some great out-of-the-box SVG helpers for tricky things like axes. But D3 also tends to make your chart less structured by putting the whole chart in one component, which can lead to tight coupling between the individual parts. It's also, I find, like a little bit less readable than React's declarative syntax. So it's a pretty tough call. I like the structure and readability that comes by using React components, but I also like using the transitions directly on DOM components. So why not? You choose a hybrid approach. What I like to do is combine both approaches. Let React render the static components, but use D3 for axes and anything that might need complex animations. You can mix and match the syntax together and see what works for you. If you want to use D3 for DOM rendering in a React component, you just need to pass a container ref to your D3 code and run it in component did mount and component did update. And there's a great article by Elijah Meeks with more details about how to do it, which I just tweeted a link to, so have a look at that. But I mentioned that one reason I really like D3 is its flexibility with animations, which I've demonstrated here with a bar chart showing a random number of random numbers, which I'm updating every 2 seconds. D3 makes it really easy to add separate transitions for entering or exiting, basically adding or deleting data, or updating the elements as well. And you can also quite easily add incremental transition delay per element, like a neat ripple effect. And I find that can work really well across lots of different chart types. Like I love it on scatter charts, it looks really nice. If you're using React for the DOM and you want sophisticated JavaScript animations for your chart transitions, you still can, but you'll need to use something like GreenSock or React Transition Group or something like that. Now, I promised I'd get to designing for diverse devices. And when it comes to responsive charts for mobile devices, you also have a few different approaches you can take. If your chart doesn't include any text, then you can just treat the chart like a big vector image and scale it with CSS. However, most charts tend to include some text, and if you scale it with CSS for a mobile device, it gets really little, and then no one can read anything. So instead, you'll need to manually set the chart dimensions based on the container component's width and height once the component mounts. If you want to ensure that it works after resizing the screen, then add an event listener for window resize and update the chart. This will make testing easier, because you can just keep on moving it back and forth and see it automatically updating. But also ensure that your chart works even when users rotate their device or resize their browser window. So that's nice. Finally, you don't have to just use D3 for charts. There are loads of layout algorithms to play with, and you can get creative with them. It's great for adding little playful flourishes to websites or talk slides. And so that's about it for me. If you have any questions, please come chat to me afterwards or get in touch using any of my imaginative online usernames. I've also tweeted out some links to handy resources and added them to these chart slides, so yeah, come check them out. Cheers.